Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bruce Vandell with Complete College America, and I really appreciate you being with us today for our webinar on how to effectively collect and report data on co-requisite support. This webinar, we started it and scheduled it because we've been working very closely with several states that are scaling co-requisite support. And we understand that, the dimensions of co-requisites are such that sometimes it's difficult for institutions to understand how to effectively track students who are in co-requisites, particularly when you consider that co-requisites often have two paired courses or different course setups. And we wanted to be able to provide institutions some insights about how to do that. But we also wanted to provide insights to system and state level leaders on how they can more effectively work with their institutions to collect data on co-requisites. Of course, we're most interested in showing the amazing results that you're all achieving. And we were working closely with all of our Alliance member states on how to do that. And so hopefully today's webinar will provide you some really good insights on how to do that. And as we work with you in the coming weeks and months, that'll enable us to be able to hopefully begin to showcase some amazing results that we know are happening on campuses. So today's webinar, just really simply, is we're going to hear from our friend Angie Bell down in Georgia about the way that they're collecting data, and also how she actually worked with West Virginia as well on the setting up of their data systems. We'll hear a little bit about both, on how they have collected data at the state and system level. We'll hear a little bit from our friend Loretta Griffy on how to do this at the institution level, how to track co-requisites in your student information system, and overall we'll be talking a bit about how you can track and report your results. And then lastly, we'll be sure to provide some time to answer your questions. And so wanted to just briefly go and describe how you can do that. So the ground rules for today's webinar: everybody's going to be on mute, so you won't be able to chime in verbally, but we do want to encourage you to provide questions. So you can submit your questions using the chat feature on Zoom, and please submit those as you have them. We have Vanessa Cadle from our team who will be monitoring those questions, and we'll pause after each presentation. So after Angie does hers, we'll give you a chance to interact with her, and then we'll do the same with Loretta, and then hopefully provide some time at the end. We are recording this webinar, so if you have colleagues or others that you want to make sure can view the webinar, we'll have it up on our website probably very soon, and so we'll make sure that you're aware of that. And then we also want to encourage you to continue the conversation. Our content experts are actually available to respond to questions using our CCA web platform, which I want to talk to you about for a couple seconds before we jump in. If you're not familiar, Complete College America just late last year, launched a new platform, and it's a very exciting tool for you to be able to get much deeper and valuable information about our game changer strategies and the way that we promote college completion in each of our Alliance states. And so we really encourage you to go there, develop a login. You can do that in the upper right-hand corner of the web page. And by doing so, that'll connect you to all of our resources. It will allow you to, sort of in a Pinterest feature, pin content to a profile. It will also allow you to interact with others on our platform, to include our content experts today. So our website has a great deal of resources, particularly around our co-requisite support strategy, as well as all our game changers. So I encourage you to visit that. And like I said, we'll make sure that this webinar is part of those resources very quickly after the end of the webinar today. And you can interact with our content experts. So you can see Loretta's photo in the right-hand corner. You just click on the profile of the content experts, and both Angie and Loretta are on our web platform, and so you could follow up with them with any questions you don't get answered today. As well as connect with any of our content experts about the work that's going on in the field related to co-requisite support. So take a few minutes today, if you have not already built a profile, to do so, and please interact with that resource. We think it's a pretty exciting new development for us in terms of sharing really deeper and more detailed information about how to implement CCA game changers. So I'll stop there with my commercial. And we're going to jump right in because we want to give all the time we can to Angie and Loretta to present. their work. And so we're going to start off with Angie Bell. Angie works with the University System of Georgia, where she is their data guru there, and has been monitoring and working on the data collection work on Corequisites in Georgia. And as I mentioned, also did much of that work in West Virginia when she was there. So I'm going to start with Angie, and then we'll go ahead and proceed to Loretta after that. So Angie, take it away.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Get switched over here. All right. Everyone should be seeing my screen now. Yes, again, my name is Angie Bell. I do work at the University System of Georgia, and I also worked in West Virginia, and in both places have had the exciting work to be involved with of keeping the data up with the innovation that's going on the ground on our campuses in our state. And I'm happy to be here as part of this webinar to talk to you about it, and afterwards to answer your questions should you have them. Just real quickly, I'm having an issue. My PowerPoint isn't advancing. Just one second. There we go. It's behaving now. There we go. I want to give you a quick snapshot of the two states before I dive into the weeds on data. So University System of Georgia, there are 28 institutions governed by the Board of Regents, ranging from little bitty South Georgia State College all the way up to like Georgia Tech and UGA and everything in between. For all 2017 enrollment existed of 325,000 students. We've been a CCA Alliance state for 7 years and went to COREC at scale in fall 2015, and will be 100% COREC in this coming fall. West Virginia is an interesting state in that it has two component systems that are both very active in this realm. The four-year system is 12 institutions coordinated by the Higher Education Policy Commission, following 2016 enrollment of 65,000. Made policy decisions in 2015 to go COREC at scale, and we'll have all remediation delivered by COREC in 2019. 100% 2019. The community college system actually pioneered that work in West Virginia. They are 10 institutions coordinated with the Council for Community and Technical College Education, enrollment of about 20,000 students, and they went to COREC at scale all the way back in 2013. And they've West Virginia as a whole has been in the alliance for 8 years. So as a state system starts to consider how to get this data together to support their co-requisite work, basically, you have to think at the most basic level about identifying students who need remediation, students who participate in remediation, and then their success in that remediation. Identifying specifically co-requisite delivery if other models still occur, and that happened in both West Virginia and Georgia. So we'll talk about that. And then also how to capture the success in the gateway college level English course. You'll have to make decisions about what level of data you're going to collect from your institutions, whether you're going to get this information at the student level or the course level. And then as a system, are possibly standard course numbers available? That's the route we went in Georgia, and I'll talk more about that when I get to the Georgia state. So the requirements and kind of some decision points to make. So for the West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission and the Community Technical College System, their collection, their institution IR offices submit flat files on students' registration and courses 6 times a year, fall, midterm and end of term for fall, spring, and summer. This method provides autonomy to the institutions in meeting system data requirements. They can record whatever they want to record in their student information system and then run reports and package it in those flat files for the system to meet those data requirements, and then the system can report on the co-requisite implementation and success. And in West Virginia, one thing that's really interesting is that they were so early in this work in remedial reform that it was sort of before co-requisite really emerged as the method to implement. So that their varied innovation at the beginning shaped how they collect their data. So in West Virginia, they identify student participation in remediation through course enrollments. Historically, prior to the reform, this was through a course level code of foundation. The other levels are like bachelor's level, master's level, etc. And then that course level code of foundation had to be crosswalked with a CIP code that aligned with it being a basic level course, the 32 series in CIPs. But when the remediation reform began, we had to get some new fields together. So they implemented a student level indicator of college ready in English, math, and reading. The values are ready, not ready, and not assist. So these fields were there to be able to identify a student who came in with remedial needs, regardless of whether they actually participated in remediation or not. And there were some ways that students could be not ready but not participate in institutional remediation. We also implemented a course developmental identifier field that I'm going to talk to you more about in the next slide. And this course developmental identifier field, it has validations in the data collection with course level code. So if a course is identified as a developmental course, it has to have that foundation level on that course level code. And it also has to align with a relatively new at this point, first English math identifier code. So if a course was a co-requisite developmental course, it had to also be designated as a first English math class as well. In West Virginia, a co-requisite class is just one class that is a first English or first math class with embedded co-requisite support, as opposed to two separate courses in Georgia. So that will make a difference in the Georgia presentation a little bit later. So this new West Virginia course developmental identifier, I want to dig into this a little bit. So when we push out the specs to the institutions, the definition there on the left of this data element sort of sets out there that there's a policy. Series 221 series are policies in West Virginia that this isn't just recommended. This is something that's in policy. Series 21 defines developmental education, and it also goes so far as to define co-requisite remediation as that became the go-to the official means for remediation in West Virginia as they went all in. So as I mentioned earlier, when West Virginia started recording this data, it was before co-requisite had emerged as the model that was most successful for students. So as you'll see, there's a code for classes that aren't developmental, and there's developmental only codes. So it's a sort of traditional model of remediation, and then different numbers depending on the subject. And then in blue highlighted there, the co-requisite model. So if a class is a co-requisite English class, it's a 21. If it's a co-requisite math class, it's a 22. And so every class that an institution offers would fill in this course developmental identifier. And if it's not a developmental class, they would put the 00, and then put the code in for the type of developmental class it is if it were a developmental class. And they were experimenting with modular things, boot camps, stretch courses, etc. So because we were experimenting broadly, there were different sort of code series for the different types of remedial reform that were going on as they moved away from standalone developmental, the 11, 12, 13, 14 codes. As this data comes in, it gets edited against other values that that they collect at the system level to make sure that the data is aligning. So co-requisite courses must also have a course level value of lower level bachelor's or career tech. So they have to have a college level, their course level code has to be a college level value on that field. And it also has to be indicated that in the first English math identifier code, it has to be indicated as being the first English class, or the first math class as well. So that cross-edit checking of cross-value fields is an important thing to implement as you start setting up your system for collecting this information. In addition to those edits that happen as the data is submitted, like they're actually running those files through technical edit checks, then there's also, they produce reports that compare year to year to look for outlier data. And so when this data comes in, one of the reports that they produce is looking at counts over time in these different types of developmental education, and then kicking it back to institutions if anything looks squirrely, as the Chief Data Quality Officer at HEPC calls it. So explicitly looking at this data as it comes in is to make sure it looks right. I will say that running those reports for data, checking data quality was difficult at first because there was so much experimentation going on way early that the numbers moved a lot. So it was hard to see outliers as it moved. But as Corequisite become the emergent model, it's been much easier to do data quality checks once the data comes in. When West Virginia does CCA reporting, standard CCA reporting, when they are talking about enrollment in remediation, in remedial education, and enrollment in co-requisite remediation, this is based on enrollment in a course that has the developmental identifier code, and specifically the co-requisite code. So on that previous screen that has one of these developmental codes, or to identify co-requisite, the blue codes. To get student success in remedial education is based on the grades and those courses that were identified with the developmental identifier code. And then students completing a college level course, they look for completion of any college level course in the subject for the co-requisite. So, so they would look for, if somebody was in remedial English, any college level English course will satisfy that student completing a college level course. I do want to make a caveat here that I had said earlier that West Virginia implemented a first English, first math identifier for courses, and that was intended to grab what would be the gateway class for institutions, but the West Virginia folks found that it was too varied across subjects, and then in some students their gateway course is a much higher level course. These would be the remedial students, but that indicator wound up being pretty problematic and not usable for reporting to CCA in terms of completing the first college level course. So they are using completing any college level course in that subject. In the new Corequisite collection that CCA is implementing, there's also a requirement for to identify students assessed as having a remedial need. And so from West Virginia, they do have that student college ready flag that they are will be able to use in identifying those students who need remediation. I do want to emphasize that they are relying primarily in CCA reporting on course level data to report on participation in and success in remediation. But that to be able to look at whether a student has a remedial need, they're using student level identifiers. Some lessons learned in West Virginia, as I mentioned a minute ago, that first English math identifier code is difficult to nail down because different disciplines have a first English math class. For example, nurses have a different first math class. So that was sort of a challenge in why they went to reporting on any college level class in English or math as passing gateway. And then I mentioned also that data quality checks were somewhat difficult as practice on the ground was shifting until Corequisite emerged as the model that was most successful for students. I want to shift to USG now, and there are quite a few differences here. First of all, rather than campuses submitting flat files to institutions submitting flat files to the system office actually extracts student course and course section enrollment data from institution banner systems 7 times a year, midterm and end of term, fall, spring, and summer, and then a preliminary enrollment in fall. And then the system provides data definitions to institutions on about 280 data fields that they collect in the banner system. But institutions can map the values in their banner system or whatever student information system they have to the standard values for extraction. So there's still some autonomy for campuses to implement this the way they want to. So I'm sure that some institutions did things quite differently as remedial reform rolled out in Georgia, but then they could map it to the standard values for us to extract from their system. I will note that this different collection system puts the onus on the campus in a different place. In West Virginia, with the IR professionals packaging data and sending it to the USG, into the West Virginia system offices, that the onus is on the IR office to pull data from their system and make it match to the system file specs and to adopt those new fields. whereas in USG, the onus really is shifted to the USG itself to make sure that our data definitions and the new data elements are properly socialized across the whole system, and that people entering data, even all the way down to departments, understand what they need to enter. And this can be a real challenge, as you can imagine, across 28 institutions, that it can be very difficult to get all the way down to the department level to make sure that everyone is entering their data correctly. So for USG Collection, I am going to talk a little bit about how we historically did it prior to reform, because I think it has insights for systems who don't collect course data. Because prior to our remedial reform, we got our, we call remediation in Georgia learning support. We got our learning support data from student level fields. So I'm quite aware that in some state systems, you don't collect individual course data. So as I talk about how USG used to collect learning support data or remediation data, you might, if that's one of what applies in your state, that you don't have course data, you can maybe apply it to how you might implement capturing co-requisite remediation at the student level. So historically, USG identified remedial need, participation, and success through 3 student fields in English, math, and reading. So we had a learning support program current enrollment indicator, and the values you can see here, that for a C, if the student has already satisfied their requirement, an N, if they're not currently enrolled but they haven't completed the requirement yet, U, they don't have a requirement in this area or they're exempt for X, and then Y is the one we use a lot to say the student is currently enrolled in a learning support course in this area. We also have a learning support requirement indicator for a student, and this has values for whether, so there's a sort of floor remediation requirements across the system, and if a student, an institution, excuse me, can have a higher threshold for remediation. So if a student is in remediation because of the system requirement, they would have an S here. If they surpass the system requirement, but the institution still requires them to meet remedial, to take remedial courses, then they would use an I. And we have this funny volunteer category. So if you are not required at all, but you show up as being enrolled in remediation, you get tapped with a V for a learning support volunteer, to show that you actually enrolled in it, even though you weren't required. And then we also have a learning support completion date. So once a student has satisfied learning support, there's a date that goes on their file of when they exited learning support. So if you are a system that doesn't collect course data, you could still get all of the information you need to report on co-requisite remediation. I feel like if you sort of expanded this learning support program current enrollment indicator to have further codes about the type of remediation, so that Y code, the student currently enrolled in learning support course, you could disaggregate that and have, like, you know, W, Y, Z, etc. to say, you know, Z being student currently enrolled in a co-requisite learning support course in this area, and maybe Y is a non-co-requisite model if your system is in the process of transitioning to being at 100% at co-requisite. So that's how we used to do it, using student indicators as opposed to course indicators, even though our data did include some course indicators as well. With the implementation of remediation in the USG, we implemented standardized course numbers for our remedial courses and new gateways. We also implemented math pathways as well, so we had some new gateway courses that needed standardized course numbers as well. So unlike West Virginia, Georgia has the gateway course is the same course number for everybody, regardless of whether they need remediation support or not. And then the co-requisite support course is a separate course. So these two little boxes are indicating that it's a separate course. So most students, when we went to scale, by that in our state, it meant that over 50% of students in remediation were placed into co-requisite as the model of their remediation. But we also took the least well-prepared students and still had them enter into a standalone foundations course that was redesigned to align with the Gateway course to be more closely aligned than it was historically. And so now students who are the least well prepared go from a foundations course to this next semester, they would go straight into the Gateway with the co-requisite support. I will say that using data we have collected about student success in these two different models since we went to scale, that we are now eliminating the foundations course model and everything will be through co-requisite beginning in the fall. But this is historically how we did it, so I'm just giving you what actually happened. We also collected at system level a placement index. We had moved from using one high stakes test for placement into the foundations versus the co-requisite. We've moved away from one high stakes test to a multi-measure placement index that include index that was for like SAT or ACT plus GPA, and then if one of those wasn't present, then also another campus-based test like the Compass was implemented. So we collected that placement index as well, so that we were able to do subsequent analysis on how students did based on their placement index. So this is what the co-requisite course numbers look like for the so out to the right over there you see that the English college level class is English 1101. The co-requisite to support that is English 0999. We have 3 different math pathways: quantitative reasoning, mathematical modeling, and college algebra. And each one of the Gateway courses has a separate co-requisite support course that goes with it. And then there's separate course numbers for the foundations one. So the foundations for English 1101 is English 0989, and similar pattern for the math, where there's a specific number that every institution uses to designate their foundations class for the different Gateway classes. When we do our CCA reporting now, I'll do before and after, because we implemented co-requisite after we started becoming a CCA state. So prior to reform, in order to get enrollment in remedial education, we used that student learning support program current enrollment indicator that's had that C value, Y value of being currently enrolled. After the reform, we check this by enrollment in a co-requisite or a foundations course that is identified by the standard course number. So instead of looking at all courses and pulling out the ones that have, so from West Virginia, they have to look at all courses and then pick out the ones that have the developmental identifier that identifies as a remedial course or a co-requisite course. The course number itself in Georgia identifies to us that is a co-requisite or a foundations course. When we look at student success in a remedial course prior to reform, we were able to look at that student learning support program current enrollment indicator because it tells us whether they have satisfied the requirement. And then post-reform, we look at the grade in that standard course number co-requisite or foundations course. And then for students completing a college level course, before and after we look at completion of the Gateway course as identified by the standard number for that Gateway course across the system. In the new co-requisite collection for the field of having to assess a student as having had remedial need when they enter the institution, we have a student college ready flag that has been around for a long time that will enable us to fulfill that obligation. I do want to emphasize again that prior to reform, we relied on student indicators, and after reform, we rely primarily on course indicators in order to do our reporting for CCA. But it still would be possible for us to report off of student level data for CCA if we chose. Lessons learned. This may be shocking to some of you at system level offices that some institutions were a little laggard on standardizing their numbering. So we've had to do a lot of communication back and forth as institutions caught up and got all on board to make sure as we collected data and reported data at the system level that we were including all of the co-requisite courses that we needed to. We had to do some specialized coding in our reports at the beginning. So just sort of emphasize the point of getting all the way down to the departmental level with your communications about entering data under remedial reform in order to get the data entered right. something that's been a challenge for us is that getting all of our different learning support indicators aligned, so ensuring that institutions' coding of those historical student indicators are in sync with the new standard course numbers. So in a few cases, we're seeing where somebody's enrolled in a prerequisite remediation according to the course number, but their student level indicator might not say that they're enrolled in learning support. So we have some data cleanup to do on that and work with institutions on data quality. And I mentioned that placement index, and while it was immensely precise in terms of using historical data to predict students' success in gateway courses and therefore their placement into learning support or not, it was very complex for institutions to implement. And so we are moving away from that and changing to a tiered approach, still using multi-measures, but just using the individual measures. And if a student passes a benchmark on any of the indicators, they are placed into the college level course. So just things, again, to sum up, things that you need to think about at your campus or your system as you implement going to scale with Corequisite, that will your recording of participation and success information be at the student level or at the course level? Will you have indicators attached to students that they are in a remediation course and that they've completed remediation? Or will it be at the course level by looking at what courses they're enrolled in? If it's at the course level, will the fact that it's a Corequisite or remedial course be an attribute of a course? So that there's some kind of an indicator about a course that shows that it is learning, that it is remediation, or that it's Corequisite? Or will it be a set specific course number that is always shown to, that was always a Corequisite course like it is in Georgia? It's important that you, whatever set of indicators you adopt, that you make sure the associated fields that you coordinated that, and if you can, implement validations, technical validations that make sure they stay aligned. So, for example, that that a course that is designated as being a remedial course shows up as being a student level foundations, etc. Or if it is, for example, in West Virginia, since their Corequisite is the remediation and the gateway all in one class, that class shows up as a first English or a first math class in that field. So making sure that those different data fields are coordinated with one another. And then again, just collaboration and communication with those entering the data. In West Virginia, that was a lot of collaboration and communication with IR offices, so they understood how to map their data to our standard fields. In Georgia, it's a lot of work with people who work in their banner systems on their campus. It's putting together documents, large documents about business practices, about how to enter this data, and making sure those are available to the people that that enter the data in the departments, et cetera, on the campuses. I think that is all of the things that I wanted to emphasize. I do have my email here, though I know that Bruce wants us to collaborate on the new portal for CCA, but there you do have my information in a pinch.
Thank you, Angie. Wonderful job. Really great stuff. We're going to pause right now, and I know we've got a couple of questions that people have asked. So Vanessa, can you take it away and facilitate this part of the program?
Sure. Angie, I think you may have answered this, but just to make it very clear, the question is, so when you say USG uses test scores plus GPA for placement, does that mean both together, or is it either or?
It used to be together, and so an index was created, so this mathematical equation was created to use both of them at the same time to make a predictive score. We're moving away from that because of its complexity and lack of transparency for students, and moving not to, I guess an either or is how it's going to work, where if you meet the benchmark on any of several indicators, then you go into college level English or math.
Okay, that was the only question in the box right now. So we're going to go ahead and let Loretta Griffy flip the screen to her and give her the program, but you will have time to ask questions at the end. So if have anything else for Dr. Bell, we can address that at the end of the program.
Hello, this is Loretta Griffy. I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to a little bit of our story and how we collect data and share information at my institution. I'm from Austin Peay State University. We are a campus of just over 10,000 students, and we have about half of our incoming students with some type of remedial developmental need. We are a full co-requisite campus, so we don't have any standalone or foundational courses at all. Our students enroll directly into the general education core course that aligns to their chosen degree program, and they enroll in courses that they need based on their placement. In terms of ACT scores, what we're using subscore for placement. We are also exploring GPA, so I was happy to hear that Georgia is looking at that or is doing that as well. And I wanted to share just a little bit of how we collect data and what it looks like and what we do with it. We collect data for several reasons. One of them is obvious and external reporting reasons, specifically to our state agencies. But we also collect a lot of data regarding course performance on our campus, to include our co-requisite courses, simply for institutional improvement and awareness purposes. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of our systems. Some of it might be a little bit techy, but I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But if it's something that you want to talk about later on, you can certainly jot that down and ask a question when we're done. Okay, so the first thing you might want to think about from a campus perspective is, how do your students get into a co-requisite course? How do they even know what that is? Well, at our campus, we list our co-requisite courses with one distinguishing mark. And for both students and advisors, it's by the section number. And that section number that ends with an E is a co-req course. We call them enhanced sections on our campus. Seems to be a nice thing for the E to stand for. I think the E was actually random, and we just decided to adopt the enhanced experience. So co-requisite experience is a 0 credit lab at our place, but when we list the courses, if you can see the screenshot, you might notice the first two sections. There's a section 01, and that's a non-co-requisite course. And then right below it is a section 01E. This is the view that your advisors would see, or your faculty and staff members, when they're looking through course search sections. And they know that E sections are the enhanced. If you look at the E sections days and locations, you'll notice that the E section has additional meeting time. That E section includes the lab. So what actually happens, section 01 and 01E actually meet together for the Gen Ed core. And if you look carefully at their locations, you can see that they're in the same room at the same time. And then our enhanced co-req section has an additional meeting time that is immediately following the course. In most cases, that happens immediately following the course. Sometimes logistics will prevent that from happening. So in terms of what does this look like in our system, this is what it looks like for a faculty or staff member. When a student goes to register for their course, they will only see the courses that they can access. So if a student needs an E section, they will see the courses filtered so that only the E sections are made available to them. And so they register for the correct course, and the same way for the non-E sections. So this is what it sort of looks like on the front face. Now, in an advising scenario, let's say you have a student in front of you, how do we use this data? How does someone know that a student needs an E section? We have an internally built, we call it our one-stop advising page. It was built, our IT and registrar's office did this for us. We were trying to find the shortest and briefest way to give advisors the quickest information possible. We're a faculty decentralized advising model. So our faculty need to be able to get information about a student very quickly and rapidly without looking through 5 or 6 different screens. So we tried to trim it down to the very minimum that they might need to ensure that a student was in the correct mathematics and or English course. So part of that process, and what you see in front of you now is the one-stop advising page. It gives us a little bit of information. We do have mandatory advisement, and so when a student has been advised, the faculty member actually places those green check marks so that the system knows the student's been advised and then is released to register for classes. On the second page, you see about the middle of the page, there's a section called Academic Deficiencies. And this is where our co-requisite needs are identified. And there's some things that look a little bit strange here. So for this particular student, under academic deficiencies, you see enhanced math listed 5 times. This is one thing that is a little bit frustrating in the data system, but this is the way it is. So the reason it is listed 5 times is that this particular student needs an enhanced math course. In the enhanced math course in the lab, there are actually 5 learning modules that the student will complete along with working on the material designed to help them pass the gen ed course that they are in. Those learning module completions are actually transcribed, and if a student transfers from my institution to another institution in the state of Tennessee and they haven't passed their gen ed core, if they have passed some portion of the learning modules within the co-requisite, those learning modules actually are transcribed and transferred to the new institution. So when the student enrolls in the learning support at the new institution, they kind of know where the student can start because some of the issues have already been addressed. Now, I will be honest with you, most of our students that complete the course complete all the learning modules, and most of our students that complete all the learning modules actually pass the course. So this may have been a little bit overkill on the front end, but nonetheless, this is where we are. It does help us identify students who aren't successful in the course and where perhaps their learning is breaking down. You'll also notice there's a status next to those. An in progress means a student is actively enrolled in the course. A completed means the student has already finished that course. So those things are somewhat self-explanatory. So all of this populated information, of course, is stored in the background. We are a Banner campus, so these fields are stored for us in Banner, which means we can run all kinds of reports and pull all sorts of information that we need. We have some preset reports that we like to look at on a regular basis. We have some information that we export to the state, and there are some fields that the state actually grabs themselves. Also gives us a little bit of flexibility if we need to complete some or get some information on the run and create a new report. We have a variety of different fields that will help us do that. We use Argos as our report writing system, so if you are a Banner campus, you're probably familiar with Argos. This is just a screenshot from one folder in my Argos account. I probably have hundreds, not probably, I know I do. I have hundreds and hundreds of Argos reports for different purposes over time and for different reasons. Most of our Argos reporting is for internal improvement purposes and not for external. Our Argos runs on our live data and not our census data. So this really is for campus, teaching and learning improvement, advisor information, and things that help us function internally as a campus in a little bit better way. So again, we're Banner. This is my Argos system. We customize reports. And I do have to say, reports aren't just built out of the sky. It's really easy to say, oh, well, you have this data and you just get this report. I'm one that likes to get my hands dirty and get in and build the reports, but on our campus, our IT and our functional technologists actually are the experts in building reports. And so we try to filter our report writing through them so that they can validate whether the fields that are being pulled or being requested are actively maintained, the data is accurate, and everything runs okay. Someone like me who likes to dig in there myself and kind of work around the IT and our functional technologists, I kind of make them a little bit crazy. So I try to respect their space, and rather than dig in myself, send my request to them so that they can make sure that the report building is valid. Output looks very much like you would expect. So this is just an example, a screenshot of a small report about some first-time, full-time freshmen. There's a whole lot of indicators across this screen if we were able to continue to scroll across. And several columns and indicators have to do with academic deficiency or co-requisite needs, whether that co-requisite course was enrolled in by that student, what the outcome was, what the grade was, and if the student is in a follow-up course, what that follow-up course is. So it allows us to pull lots of rich information for internal purposes. Of course, the bad news is that's a lovely report, and we export it to a not so lovely file. So you need to be a little bit adept at manipulating your files, building charts, graphs, filtering your data, whatever you need to do, doing your statistical and data analysis in Excel before you build something that you want to actually probably share internally with folks. Since it is CSV, you can put this in Excel, or so a lot of times I'll put it into a stat package instead, just because I'm more comfortable with manipulating that. But nonetheless, you may get an output that gives you a lot of information. And the output that I have on the screen right now is the first page of about a 7 or 8 page report that I provide to deans and chairs upon request about performance, course performance, period, really. But this report is specifically written for courses that are co-requisite, so that we have a comparison of our students that are in the co-requisite. We call co-requisite structured learning assistance. So if you're looking at this screen and wondering what all this is, SLA stands for structured learning assistance. That means the areas where you see SLA data are strictly data related to course performance in co-requisite courses. So you can get a feel for what kind of information we might look at, and we like to look at a lot of information. You may notice that we even look at the time of day. Is there something going on by time of day? We also try to draw at least become informed about performance in those courses, whether they're structured learning E-section courses or regular courses. Get a little bit of an idea of what student performance is by their ACT subscore, by different types of things and what they're doing. We also have a really strong interest internally about their persistence or / graduation. So we really want to know what they're doing the very next semester. Did they return that immediate next semester? We, like every other institution in the nation, carefully follow first-time, full-time retention rates, but that means you have to wait a really, really, really long time, and we are not a fan of waiting a really long time. So we like to look at our next semester persistence rates, which we know will be an indicator and point to what our longer-term retention rate is, or graduation. It's entirely possible that a student in an E-section course either returns and enrolls the next semester or perhaps graduates. It's very rare because the preponderance of our students in E-sections are freshmen, and we do have some sophomores. We will have a trickling of juniors or seniors that are in those courses. Those are generally transfer students that for some reason have not fulfilled an E-section or a gen ed core need. So we get to talk a lot about this information. We also pay a lot of attention to disaggregating by ACT score, only because we're using ACT score as our primary placement tool. We are also using AccuPlacer as a secondary placement if a student wants to challenge that placement, but we have been exploring the possibility of using high school GPA as well. Not necessarily on any kind of combination or sliding scale, but as was said earlier in Georgia, as an or. Perhaps a certain a certain GPA will be the GPA that places you out of a co-requisite course. So we're exploring that as well. So we like to disaggregate everything. You'll notice here I've blacked out some things, and I will tell you why. This is where things get very sensitive on a campus. We look at this at the instructor level as well. So we will compare some data on the instructor level. We do not publicly publish this data, and we very, very carefully share this data. This primarily is shared with chairs so they can look for ways to help their faculty perhaps address some challenges in the classroom or engage with our Center for Teaching and Learning in instructional strategies that promote student success. You'll see a red and a green here on that chart. Those are my statistical outliers. If there's no shading, we've got it automatically formatted. If there's no shading, then there are no outliers. And so you don't have perhaps any issue with an instructor when there's no shading or even anything to look at. So for the purposes of institutional internal improvement and not for the purposes of publicly putting information on a website, it's really developmental for our campus and for our faculty, and to make sure that we know on the ground what's happening. We use our data pulled from Banner. We have the students identified, which is we have student identifiers who need an E-section or a co-requisite. We also have the course level identifiers, so we can pull however we need to pull in order to get the information we need for improvement purposes. For external reporting purposes, our institutional research office does what everybody else does and reports information about first-time, full-time students. And our first-time, full-time students, we just aggregate a lot of information about their retention, and some of that information that we disaggregate is about academic deficiencies. On the screen, you'll see that information lower on the screenshot. And also by subject for academic deficiency. So the information we have on the screen right now is retention data. This is data that our institutional research office publishes publicly on a website. So you can see what our fall to fall or fall to spring retention data look like, as well as what it looks like disaggregated by particular co-requisite needs by our students. We also export some information to our Tennessee Higher Education Commission, and when I say export, I say that very loosely. They actually grab that information out of our system. What we have to do for them is verify which of our courses, which course sections actually are our co-requisite sections, and once we send that information to them, they actually extract that information out of our system and compile it with the rest of the state. So I just wanted to show you an example of what that looks like with the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, and knowing that they extract that data from what we share with them. So in terms of sharing course level data, we share with provosts, academic deans, and other interested parties. And those interested parties are not just anybody who asks, but parties that really would have a reason why they need that. Institutional level data we share with our administrative leadership, our faculty leadership, and other interested parties. And then our external reporting, we're reporting to our Tennessee Board of Regents, of which we're no longer a member, but we are continuing some friendly relations and sharing some data with them so they can report some of our outcomes. And then also with our Tennessee Higher Education Commission so that they compile the information and the data they need for the public and for our politicians and for reporting out on the success of our system in Tennessee. So that is all of my information, and I hope that I have gotten to it quickly enough. And if you have any questions, I am more than happy to answer those questions and share with you any other information that you may want to know.
Thank you, Loretta. That was great. I do have some questions for you. Jeremy asks, he's really interested in the report of time of day. Could you briefly explain how you went about getting that into your reports? And he's curious if you saw any trends.
So, yes. So all of our courses, of course, have when they're offered. And we have a nice system in place in that our section number actually is an indicator of when the courses start. I didn't create that. That was here when I got here, and it's a lovely thing. So what we know is based on the section number, what time that course actually began. So based on section number, we can disaggregate by time offering. So when we do that, here's basically what we found. Our first-time freshmen at 8 o'clock in the morning, this surprises nobody, don't do very well as compared to taking the class at 10, 11, 12 in that range. Our classes later in the afternoon, we also see, or evening, we see a dip in performance in the later afternoon time. So it seems to be middle of the day is sort of the best time to take a class. Now, that being said, it could be that the students that register first pick those times of the day. And we all know that students who quickly register and are paying attention to when they can get into courses might often, they perhaps could be some of our better students. So I don't want that information in any way for anyone to think, gosh, that means if I wait and take the class later, I have a higher probability of a good grade. That's not something that I think may be the case. It may simply be an indicator of who is registering when. We have not drilled down into that data in any way to see if we can pull that apart. It's just kind of interesting to look at what happens at different times of day.
Okay, and Carl has a question. He says, do you strive for any particular mix of corequisite students and at-level students in the courses? Is there recognition that some instructors may specialize in developmental / corequisite education?
So we aim for every class to be at least 50% of students who do not need a corequisite model. That doesn't mean that always happens, but that is our aim. So what we try to do is to have groups of 20 to 25 corequisite students embedded in a course. Sometimes our courses are rather large in size. We might have a course of 90 to 100 students in a math course. So we might have two courses two corequisite sections kind of embedded in that one lecture experience. So that is where we aim. We don't have a hard and fast rule on it, but we certainly have a target where we try to get to. Honestly, some of it is driven by logistics, like what room is available and when. And I know that's not very sophisticated, but I bet it's a reality on a lot of campuses. Your class size sometimes is a function of the room that you have available. So in terms of instruction in those courses, our mathematics faculty serve as the instructor for the actual lecture, for the actual gen ed course. And our lab is taught by upper level students, graduate students, or sometimes we have some adjuncts that might fill in occasionally if we're not able to staff it in those other alternative ways. So we don't actually have developmental faculty and math faculty. We just have math faculty. So all of our mathematics faculty are SACs or accreditation ready. They have the appropriate credentials to teach college level coursework.
Great. And we're at time, but we do have one more question, so I'm going to allow it. Stacy asks, she has a question about E designation. does it show up on their transcript as a different type of course, or is it just in the registration field?
It's just in the registration field. So on the transcript, for any of our students, we don't show section numbers at all. We show the 4-course designator, like MATH, the course number, and the course title. So that's, and the grade, that's all that gets transcripted, not the actual section number.
Okay, all right, that's all the questions we have. So thank you to Dr. Bell and Dr. Griffy. This was fantastic. If anybody out there has other questions for our presenters today, they can use the CCA web platform to connect with them there, or they both share their contact information. This webinar will also be recorded and posted on the Corequisite support page on our web platform. So we hope you will share with other folks, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.